America, a nation of glittering cities, endless opportunities, and fantastic wealth. For some people. Because despite all that prosperity, there are still tens of millions of Americans living in poverty. But what if they don't have to? In recent years, some of the country's brightest minds became convinced that we could make poverty a thing of the past. And when they put that theory to the test, it did not go as planned. Here's a thing Americans often take for granted. We're pretty rich. In 2023, the median income for a married couple was about $120,000. The median size of a new home was about 2,500 square feet. And this is a problem you only get in wealthy countries. Over 40% of adults were obese. And then, as if to prove a point about how much money we have, we all started spending $1,000 a month on medication to keep us from being obese. But as we all know, this wealth is not universal. Despite years of government programs that have attempted to help the most disadvantaged among us, it's still the case that nearly 37 million Americans live in poverty. And in recent years, that's led a coalition of everyone from activists to intellectuals to tech executives to propose a bold new idea. What if we just gave everyone enough money to lift them above the poverty line? And when we say this was a bold new idea, we mean it was a bold and very, very old idea. In fact, all the way back in 1797, the Revolutionary Era writer Thomas Paine was arguing for an idea along these same lines. And in the 1960s, Milton Friedman, a future winner of the Nobel Prize in economics, was making a similar case. Instead of a bunch of welfare programs, just have the government give people the cash instead. This idea is usually referred to as Universal Basic Income, or UBI, and one of its most noteworthy features is how it's attracted supporters from across the political spectrum. For some conservatives, combining UBI with the elimination of other welfare programs is a way to shrink the size of government while still helping the most disadvantaged Americans. For some progressive supporters, who, it bears noting, are usually more skeptical of eliminating other welfare programs along the way, UBI is a way to combat income inequality and ensure the dignity of those living in poverty. It's also popular in the tech sector, with many Silicon Valley leaders arguing that UBI will be a necessary way to provide for Americans when AI starts taking their jobs away. Which we suppose is a nice gesture, but probably a distant second to just killing the AI with fire. Now, as big ideas go, this is one that's pretty hard to try out. In 2019, when presidential candidate Andrew Yang was running on the idea of a UBI that would pay every American adult $1,000 a month, it was estimated that the cost of the program would be over $2.5 trillion a year, which meant that it would cost more than 10% of the country's GDP. To be clear, that's not 10% of the federal budget, it's 10% of the country's entire economy. Since spending that kind of money on an unproven idea was too risky, most attempts to try UBI out have taken the form of small local programs aimed at just a handful of people, which doesn't really tell us much about how it would work in the real world. That changed, however, in 2024 with the release of the biggest UBI study ever done. Analysis conducted by Open Research, an organization backed by OpenAI CEO and UBI supporter Sam Altman. All of which is important background because the study's results were probably not what they were hoping for. Here's how it worked. Researchers took 3,000 people, all of them between the ages of 21 and 40, and with incomes that averaged under $30,000 a year, and split them randomly into two groups. 2/3 of them received $50 a month, and 1/3 received $1,000 a month. Then they tracked the results over the course of 3 years. Now, the reason that you design a study this way is that if UBI was genuinely life-changing, you'd expect to see important differences between the people getting $1,000 a month and the people getting $50. And the good news is, That happened. But the bad news is, the people who got more money actually ended up worse off. Here's what we mean. Some proponents have argued that UBI could increase employment because recipients could use the extra money for things like job training or more reliable transportation to work. But the study found that the people who got the bigger pot of money worked fewer hours and stayed unemployed longer than the people who only got $50, and that most of this newly found free time was just spent on leisure. And maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe just making sure UBI recipients have more money is a worthy goal in and of itself. But about that, the households of people who received $1,000 a month actually ended up with less money in the bank than those of the people who got $50, between $3,000 and $4,000 a year less. How? Well, not only were they working less, but they were also spending virtually all the money and racking up more debt than the people who received smaller amounts. None of which is to say that there was no good news. People in the UBI study reported feeling modestly better about their financial security. They were more likely to move to new neighborhoods, and they had brief reductions in stress. All of which is kinda nice, but it's a long way from finding a cure for poverty. There's a reason anti-poverty policy is so hard. Figuring out how to give people enough support so that they're not suffering without giving them so much that they lose ambition is incredibly difficult. And so far at least, no one's figured out how to strike exactly the right balance. So, maybe it's a question we ask the AI. Oh, right.